This is Andy here, BC Builds, explaining a few things for a friend Marcos who just messaged me on Facebook. How tattoo machines should run, the difference between a liner, shader, and a color packer. These are the ones I use on a daily basis. I'm not even going to get into why, it would just take too long. But two of them are next generation tattoo machines, an Eclipse and Orion, and then this is a rebuilt DV8. First we'll start with a liner, and this is just my personal preference on how these should run. I feel this is the best way to run machines, but it's just my opinion. Everybody runs their shit different. Obviously a liner should be fast, so you can get a consistent line. It's not all dotty. But his question was, should it run fast and soft or fast and hard? And in my opinion, I think a liner, and most people I think would agree with me, it should run harder. Not insanely hard, but it should be punchy. So for a liner, I would say fast and hard is probably the best way to go. So remember, the harder it hits, the more likely you are going to tear somebody up. So you got to be careful. You got to find that balance. And this machine runs at 142 cycles per second and around 52 duty. And then the next machine, is a gray wash shader, which is meant for black and gray or really light color work. And I'll run this. And a gray wash shader, in my opinion, this is how I run my machines for gray wash, and I do a lot of gray wash. That's my shit. I'm not amazing at it, but that's what I prefer to do. Gray wash machines, I think they should run fast, not as fast as a liner. My liner runs around 140 cycles per second, and my shader, my gray wash shader, it runs around 122 cycles per second, and this is all without a needle I'm talking about. But the difference with the gray wash shader, it's a medium speed, it's not as fast as a liner, but it's a softer hit. And the reason for that being is you want it to run fast enough when you're doing your shading and fading out, you're getting consistent coverage. That's where the speed comes in. But with black and gray, you're overlapping a lot of those colors to blend them. So you want it soft, a little softer of a hit, so you're not overworking those areas. This is around 53 duty and 121 cycles per second. Medium speed, soft hit. And that's for black and gray. Then the last one, the primary machines, you can go into technical machines and other stuff, I'm not going to get into it, is a color packer. This is for packing solid black, like tribal, or just color work. In this machine, as you can hear, it runs slower. A color packer, you want to run slower. This runs 102 cycles per second. But it's a firm hit like a liner. The color packer you want to hit hard for saturation, not too hard because then you'll fuck people up. But a color packer you want to run slow and hard. And when it comes to springs, there's multiple ways to achieve any given effect. You really just got to play around with it. I know a lot of people with their gray wash shaders, they have big long springs on them and then they put an O-ring. Instead of putting an O-ring, I just put a shorter spring. Because when you put an O-ring on, it changes the bend point. Say I put an O-ring on, instead of it bending from right here, it would bend out here at the end of the O-ring, changing the tension of the spring. So instead of using a big long spring with an O-ring, I just use a shorter spring. Typically 18 gauge or 20 gauge. This one's a 20 gauge, but it's just all how I set it up. Typically for my gray wash shaders, I would use an 18 gauge spring, a short front spring and a short back spring, and no O-ring. Or you could use a long front spring and put an O-ring on it to make it a little quicker. And then with the color packer, I do use an O-ring just because color packers run slower and they tend to be a little noisier. And the reason that is, which most people don't realize, is why a color packer is a little noisier. And it's not really because it's noisier, it's just because lower frequencies, such as a lower cycle, the slower the machine, the speed the machine moves at is a frequency, you know, like 100 hertz. A hertz is 1 cycle per second. That's why it says hertz on your power supply. So the lower the hertz, the louder it is. because something of a lower frequency or a lower hertz will actually travel farther. Like when somebody drives past you with a stereo like mine, a big subwoofer, when they drive past you, you don't hear those loud highs. You don't actually hear the rap song, the guy actually rapping. All you hear is that bass, the boom, 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 boom. And it's not necessarily because it's louder than the interior speakers. It's because it travels farther. That's just how the wavelengths work.